Now, heading into the election, it was widely seen as a referendum on President Moon Jae-in, who pushed for engagement and dialogue with North Korea. A victory for Yoon Suk-yeol would be a blow for the Moon administration, which came to power 5 years ago in a landslide amid high hopes in the wake of his predecessor's impeachment. Now, while the election will be consequential for South Korea's foreign policy with the United States, China, and Japan, South Koreans have been largely preoccupied, like we said, with domestic issues, including soaring housing prices, a cutthroat job market, and contentious divisions over gender. As policy differences between the two leading presidential candidates in North Korea could not be more clear, and foreign policy priorities also remain an area of disagreement between the two, the U.S. and Europe must also be closely watching the South Korean election. Let's get some perspective. Joining me from Washington is Scott Snyder, Director of U.S.-Korea Policy at Council on Foreign Relations. And from London is Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College, London. Welcome both gentlemen on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, I'd like to ask you, Scott, how is Washington, the White House, watching the South Korean election unfold?
Well, I think Washington is probably feeling fortunate that the United States is a lot more popular than either of the presidential candidates. And so what that has done is that it has made the relationship with the United States not a political issue in this election. Obviously, the Biden administration is paying close attention to the respective policy positions of both candidates. But I also believe that the Biden administration feels confident that it will be able to work with either candidate, especially following the Moon-Biden summit from last May, where we saw a progressive leader sign up to a pretty comprehensive security agenda with the Biden administration. And if Lee continues in Moon's footsteps, then one would expect continuation of that, whereas Yoon has been very vocal in his desire to strengthen alignment with the United States.
Now, I want to address Ramon. Ramon, is that the same case with Europe? I mean, how is Europe watching the South Korean elections?
I think that it is similar in the sense that, of course, relations between Korea and Europe have been strengthening in recent years. We saw President Moon attending, for example, the G7 summit and the Open Society's statement being signed that had a clear anti-China and anti-Russia message, even if they weren't mentioned by name. And of course, now Korea is one of the few countries in Asia that is contributing to the efforts of the European Union, NATO, to try to counter Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And also we have to say that the two candidates obviously haven't talked much about Europe. It's not a big issue compared to the US, compared to China, but their foreign policy teams have indicated that they see better relations with the EU, with NATO, and with key European countries, France and Germany, for example, as crucial to South Korean foreign policy in future years. And this has been very much welcomed by European leaders and also by European experts.
Well, Ramon, neither candidate has any foreign policy experience, held a cabinet-level position, or been a member of parliament. Would that be an issue, or is that something unique or unusual for his counterparts in Europe?
I think that European policymakers are really looking at the foreign policy teams of the two candidates, because as you mentioned, none of them has foreign policy experience or have been in the National Assembly. So we're paying close attention to who is advising the candidates on foreign policy matters. And we have to say that there are mainstream experts that are widely known by people in Europe who follow Korean issues and Asian affairs as well. So in a sense, there is a sense of relief that when it comes to foreign policy, whoever wins, probably or hopefully, they will be leaning heavily on very well-known experts that in Europe are very well-liked. Having said that, of course, the president can decide to follow any course when it comes to foreign policy, any course he wishes, any direction. So I think we'll have to wait until May, June, July, the first 3 months of the new president in office, to see whether he will continue more or less mainstream policies that the Korean presidents have been following for the past few years, or whether they will come up with any sort of surprise, which wouldn't be welcome, I think, in Europe.
Right, Scott, how do you expect the election outcome to affect South Korea-U.S. alliance moving forward? I mean, do you expect any kind of change in one way or another?
Well, the Biden administration has pretty much set its course as related to North Korea policy and as related to its policy toward the Indo-Pacific. And it has worked well, I think, with the Moon administration for its first year. And so I think that the expectation is that there will also be a continuation in terms of a cooperative approach. The Biden administration has really prioritized the revitalization of the U.S.-South Korea alliance and looks to South Korea as a partner. And I think that the South Korean public also expects the new president to be an effective international leader. And part of that is going to be engaging well with the United States. So even though the new leader is going to have a pretty steep learning curve and have to really learn his way around in terms of foreign policy, I think that the expectations on the part of the United States are that the new leader will look to the U.S. as an important partner and that there is a strong basis for continuing cooperation regardless of who wins.
Right. From your perspective, I mean, with with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, especially, do you think an administrative change or a government change, whatever that may be, how do you think that will reshape South Korea's relations with Europe?
Well, South Korea's relations with Europe are actually being reshaped as we speak, because I think this is the first time that you see a Korean government very openly supporting Europe in a matter of survival, really, for the continent, which is addressing Russia's aggression. If we compare with 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, there was a very limited response from Korea. There was condemnation, and that was it. But now we see Korea joining in the sanctions, for example, providing economic support to Ukraine. So in a sense, this has been welcomed by Europeans and has enhanced the position and the views of Korea as a partner for Europe, both the EU, NATO, and also, of course, some European countries as well. And what I think is the expectation here in Europe is that this will continue whoever wins the election, because at the end of the day, the threat that comes from Russia to Ukraine is similar to the threat that comes from other authoritarian regimes in other parts of the world, and of course, including China and North Korea in the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia more broadly.
Now, Scott, what about Seoul, Washington, Tokyo, Trilateral security cooperation? Do you think this could get a boost under a new president here in Seoul?
Well, it's a continuing theme for the Biden administration, and so there are expectations there for the new South Korean administration to work closely with Tokyo and Washington. I think that in this case, candidate Yoon has put forward a more positive vision of the bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan. And that is certainly something that would be welcomed by the Biden administration. Having said that, even if there are continued difficulties in the Japan-South Korea relationship, that just makes trilateral cooperation even more important for the Biden administration to continue in order to provide a means by which to maintain stability between its allies in Asia, despite the problems that they might have with each other.
All right, Scott Snyder, Director of U.S.-Korea Policy at Council on Foreign Relations, and Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College London. Many thanks, both of you, for speaking with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.